I'm here today with Ann Herrmann of Herrmann International. Ann, it's such a pleasure to sit down with you and get to really kind of dive in and ask you questions I've wanted to ask forever.
That's great. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you so much. And so, first of all, especially for our listeners, we've known each other for quite a while, but I'd love for you to tell everyone about your current role and how you came to be in this position at Herrmann International.
Well, I am currently chair of the board and chief thought leader of Herrmann, which is a new role for me. So it's actually it's been a really exciting time for me because I'm doing something quite different than I was doing for many years. And that means that I play three primary roles at Herrmann. I continue our research and development and looking at cognitive processes and how our thinking impacts how effective we are every single day. And that's exciting. And I'm doing some exciting new research I might share with you later. I also play a role in terms of working directly with clients. And so I'm working with mostly CEOs of very large global companies. And that's just thrilling because it's an opportunity to put the work into action in a hands-on way that I didn't have as much of when I was actually running the company a few years ago. And then I play a role in marketing and supporting and writing and so on and so forth, as well as product development. So I've got, three primary facets and then the R&D kind of enveloping it. And it's great because this research has been around for over 35 years. But it's a very exciting time for Herrmann because we've kind of reinvented almost everything in the last few years. So very, very exciting time to be part of the organization.
I am so glad you brought up the work that you're doing with CEOs. I'd love you to talk more about that and just jump right in. What are you doing now with that group?
Well, what's been really interesting for me, and having, I approach the notion of working with CEOs as a CEO, a recovering CEO, I guess I might call myself, having run a company for many years. And so what I'm doing is looking at how they can accelerate the kind of culture change that they feel is most essential to moving from point A to point B. Most of them are really in some form of disruption mode. I'd say primarily self-disruption before, so they want to be the leaders of where it is that they play. And all of them are strongly committed to people development, which I think is kind of an interesting angle in today's environment. If you're not interested in people development as an organization, you have a very tough time attracting, retaining, and engaging talent. So, I'm inspired almost every day in working with these CEOs, and it ranges from retail to pharma to other industries, manufacturing. So it's a pretty broad base, and I guess what's thrilling for me is not only to be able to help them translate their vision into something that is more easily understood and embraced by everybody in the organization, because what we provide people is that ability to understand how they think and how their thinking impacts how they hear a vision, how they translate that vision, what they do with that. What do these values really mean? So we're really providing kind of an enterprise-wide approach for a company to be more whole-brained in the way they go about what they do from the inside out. And that's just thrilling for me. It's kind of been the culmination of all this work that I've done all these years, is to actually be in the field with these leaders making that happen.
And I'm wondering, as you said that, because of issues around retention and attracting new talent, if the time is, the timing right now, what would you say? Isn't it kind of more important than ever to really be able to build your culture?
It's essential. It's kind of a hygiene factor. If you're not addressing this, then you don't have the people. People are the engine that drive the enterprise. And I used to have a friend who used to say, well, numbers may drive the business, but guess who drives the numbers? It's people, right? So one of the things that I'm finding is the most progressive and most successful organizations are those that have leaders who not only give this lip service, because every leader gives this lip service. Everybody says, talent our people are their most important asset, blah, blah, blah. It's those that actually take action and bring a development mindset into the organization and into the culture in such a way that everybody from the factory floor all the way up to the executive suite knows that this is important and that this is going to be not only important to the organization, but important for them. So it's really kind of a partnership between the organization and the talent that's working there.
I do read a lot about organizations going and becoming growth organizations or learning organizations because it's so hard to know everything and do everything in advance now. We are all responding to a lot of unknown. Do you feel like you're hearing a lot of that and you're helping companies become more of that mindset?
Absolutely. Carol Dweck's work on looking at a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, that ability to believe that you could kind of build your intelligence like a muscle. I'm finding that notion of having a growth mindset and being a learning organization is sometimes explicitly described, sometimes less explicitly. I think the true test for most people joining organizations is to see, where will I get my development? And I think people are voting with their feet, right? If they don't get the development, if they don't see the true investment in who I am as a person, even if my stint is only a 2 to 3 year stint at this company, which it often is in today's environment, then I'm going to leave, right? And I think that reality has really come home to a lot of organizations. So it's really about the action that they're taking. Great to have it in the value statements and other forms, but it's really about, are you spending the dollars, taking the time, and then what I think is really exciting for me is developing those next layers down to really lead and manage in a way that is about engaging the most cognitively diverse group you can, and getting the most, more than the sum of the parts of the people that you've got on your team. And that, for some managers, is a bit of a challenge. They haven't always been developed in a way that they know how to do that. So for me, what's thrilling about the work that we're doing is that we're really providing some hands-on, very practical ways for managers to learn how to do that.
You mentioned earlier that your company has really reinvented itself. Could you talk a little bit about that too?
Sure. Well, so we're a third generation family business. So my father started the company over 35 years ago. I'm a second generation leader, following in his footsteps, so to speak. And then most recently, my son, Herrmann-Nedhi, has stepped up to the CEO position. And what's so interesting, you think having been through an experience yourself of kind of stepping into that second generation role, what I have learned in the process of being now the leader who is, letting the third generation step up, is that one of the reasons why third generation family businesses are successful when they are is because they let the next generation bring to bear very new thinking about what you do, how you do it, and how you go to market. And so for us in the last few years, under his vision, we've moved to a different kind of business model. We're now a SaaS platform. We're a technology business. We're an analytics business. And it's for me, it's allowed me to kind of reinvent myself as part of the process. So it's thrilling. And I think we're ahead of the curve in terms of some of the other folks in our industry doing that. So that makes it even more interesting.
It sounds like you love your role and being in your current role. What would you say is your biggest challenge?
I'd say, and I as I thought about this question, it's like, well, it's just finding the time to get everything done that I want to get done right now. We're a global business. We're working with some very large enterprises. I could spend all of my time doing nothing but client work, but I'm also very interested in the research. I'm also very interested in some of the writing and so on and so forth. So it's really just being as available as I can be to do all the things that I want to accomplish now that I'm freed up from the day-to-day role that I had for so many years. And I think that's probably my greatest frustration.
it must be pretty exciting to see your son at the helm.
It really is, and it's funny. I remember working with my dad and how watching him sort of feel this sense of pride to see me step up. Sometimes irritation that I would do things differently than he would, which I can probably relate to too. But yes, it's really thrilling, and it's also, I think it's a gift for people in family businesses. You don't often get to interact with your adult children as adults in a work environment. You kind of know them as your kids. And one of the things that's really fun about this is that working side by side with him, I'm seeing a completely different side than I might
Sure.
see if I were just seeing him on the holidays, right? Or over
Right.
Thanksgiving. So that's really been a lot of fun.
That's awesome. I'm curious to know, you've had an amazing career. And I know you travel, you speak extensively, and you work with a lot of companies. And as you say, it's such a exciting to work alongside these organizations and help them, in doing something that's so meaningful. What would you say is maybe you're most proud of in your career, or you find most gratifying, however you'd like to state it? But what are you most proud of?
I'd say that for me, even though we are often selling to companies, very large organizations, very senior people inside those organizations, for me, what I'm most proud of is that I know that what we do impacts people. We call them individual thinkers because we're all about thinking in what they do every single day. And to be able to have that level of impact all over the globe with millions of people, where we've been able to give them a new understanding of their own thinking potential, and then what they can do to continue to grow and to feel that they've got access to thinking that maybe they didn't realize that they had. And to see that level of satisfaction. I'll occasionally bump into somebody not too long ago at an airport who was in a keynote that I delivered for a company, I don't know, maybe it was almost a decade ago, recognized me, came up to me and kind of said, I just need to let you know that, my ability to understand my thinking, to do the assessment, to get a tangible plan around what I could do to become a great manager instead of just a good manager. I mean, it changed my life. And that's just so, does it get better than that?
No.
For me, that's it.
It
So
doesn't.
that ability to have that impact on people every single day, for me, is really what gets me out of bed in the morning.
And I have to share, we use the Herrmann Brain Dominance here at Clemson MBA. I was recently on a call with MIT and some other universities, and they were all using Herrmann Brain Dominance with their engineers and so forth. And I think the beauty is individuals learning these tools, this framework of looking at their cognitive abilities at an early age, as they're launching out or as they're currently in leadership roles. I really do believe that that's very powerful. And I would imagine you see that as well. I know you've come and spoken in our classes, and we certainly do appreciate that. But I do think the Herrmann Brain Dominance has, again, it's wonderful information, and it just there are many ways to look at it and unfold it and unpack it. Do you find that you still learn things as you work with it?
I actually do. And it's been really interesting for me as we look at, the assessment is one piece of the puzzle. I think what I've learned in recent years that's been really thrilling is that the research started with my father trying to understand how the brain worked and what this idea of whole brain thinking really meant. And then he developed the assessment, and we got very involved with the assessment and so on and so forth for many years. And things come back around full circle. And for me, what's been so thrilling is to look at how organizations are embracing this idea of whole brain thinking and what that really means. And there was a Harvard Business Review article, over a decade ago that was entitled "Putting Your Company's Whole Brain to Work," and that's really what we're doing today. It's a big differentiator, I think, for what we've been focused on in recent years. Is it's not just enough to know about yourself. It's great to be self-aware. That's a critical part. but it's all about what you do with it and how you apply that thinking to make better decisions or better solve problems or come up with better ideas, better innovate, or better engage with the work that you're doing, better transform your culture. So it's all about how you engage all of your thinking. And so the assessment is really just a means to looking at that. And there's so many applications that are out there that I'm really excited about what we can see happen, because it's kind of just, it continues to just grow and grow beyond what I think I ever thought was possible.
So you still hear stories that delight you and ways that people are using it and ways that teams are incorporating it that... Yes, I can imagine. We use it for our students that go to Oxford, and they coming together, or 21 students, very quickly don't know each other, much like a virtual business team in a company. We use it so that they can kind of quickly understand who's on the team and the kind of cognitive abilities on the team. And then as they go out to do some consulting work in the Midlands of England, they really use the whole brain model to make sure everyone's weighing in and they get that diversity of thought. So they many times will say, this is like the coolest thing, I've learned. And I do think that the idea of pulling everyone's thinking in, which sometimes doesn't happen, as one dominant area might override. So,
and it's been interesting. One of our lead the person who leads our platform development, we try to eat our own cooking at Herrmann. Actually applied this to looking at the software development process, and has done some presentations on that. I mean, that was kind of just of his own undertaking and interest in terms of applying this. And so I think for me, he's actually partnered with our clients and some of our vendors who are serving us. So I think that for me, that's really thrilling when you start to see people inside your own company coming up with new ways to apply this and actually doing it every day.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of fun.
One thing I think about is when I think about your dad is how he was, I guess he worked at GE, he worked in engineering, I believe, and he also sang. He was a singer, so he was very right brain, left brain, and I wonder what your dad would think if he were to look at the organization today and everything that's happened.
I think he would be really excited. It's it was a personal story for him initially, because he, sciences and music, double major, he felt like they were two different tribes, and he was like, how come I can mix with these two different groups, but they don't mix with each other naturally? And so that's when that notion of whole brain really kind of sparked back in college at Cornell. It was kind of like, why is this happening? And it wasn't until his late 50s that this really kind of took on its own life. And he had a vision of, billions of brains served in terms of he wasn't sure how that was going to happen. And I think what's really, I think he'd be very excited to see his grandson actually finding a way to, and the tools and putting a platform together that allows that scalability to actually happen around the globe, and to allow an organization to embrace and adopt this and move very, very quickly with it.
How did he actually go from the idea and the inspiration to actually starting to create and build this
So
model?
he actually had as often happens with great ideas, he had a problem he was trying to solve. And it turned out to be two problems. But one of the key problems he was trying to solve was this notion of why it was, and I'm sure you can relate to this, why some of the learning programs at GE at Crotonville, heralded worldwide for being, a great learning organization, seem to be so much more effective than others. Really resonating with the learners, and everybody walking out exactly with what you intended them to walk out with. And others just didn't seem to be quite as effective. Great design, great content, but why is it not working? And then at the same time, GE was looking for ways to, spark innovation and creative thinking in the organization. And so the other question he was asking himself is this something that you can teach, or is it an innate thing that only some of us have? And those two kind of collided. As he was doing research on both of them, he sort of stumbled upon the brain, and as a scientist, became quite interested in it. So ultimately, he got corporate sponsorship for this, somewhat under the radar. Some people call that a positive deviant. He was over in the corner. He had a great boss who kind of let him do a lot of that initial research. And then ultimately, he got CEO funding for it. It became really, it sort of took on a life of its own. So GE actually funded the work. And I think that's one of the reasons why the work is so practical and workplace focused. It's because it was really designed to solve a real problems in the workplace. And so he unlocked a lot about great learning design in terms of what's really required. And he also was able to understand a lot about creative thinking as part of the process.
Excellent. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, you've lived in this environment, you studied at his feet, and you saw a lot of that iteration as he was putting that together. Do you consider yourself to be creative?
Well, that's an interesting and ironic question, because I actually grew up in an environment where I get wired up to the EEG for testing after school because he was constantly doing research, and so I was game. I was a game guinea pig, but I also grew up in a family where my father was actually an accomplished artist late in life. Both of my sisters were artists and went to art school. So in that environment, I actually always sort of felt like I wasn't that creative because I had in my head this outdated definition of creativity kind of being you had to be sort of, an artist, and it needed to be, evident in the way that you might pursue, traditional creative pursuits. So for years, I kind of, people would say, oh, your sister's doing art there, and your father and your other sister. So Anne, are you creative? And I'd always sort of feel like, well, not like they are. and it was a frustration for many years. And it wasn't until I got into the workplace, I started applying what I'd grown up with, which is this idea of whole brain thinking. And hearing my father talk about how really creativity and innovation really is a whole-brained endeavor, that I began to realize that I did actually have my own brand of creative thinking that wasn't the traditional, Michelangelo level of creative thinking, but it was about my ability to conceptualize new ideas and think about things that were way out into the future, and really pursue ideas that maybe no one else would kind of even want to pursue, that made me more creative. So it took me a few years to figure that out, believe it or not, growing up with a guy who said, he was Mr. Creativity. I wasn't so sure.
And in that same vein, what does innovation mean to you?
Well, innovation's interesting because I think it's a word that gets thrown around a lot, right? And I like to think of there being a continuum, right? Of continuous improvement down at one end, which feels very safe, much less risky. And then, pure creative thinking down at the other end of the continuum, which is just, completely new, original, that kind of, wow, never heard of that before. I believe that innovation is the perfect marriage between those two things. It's bringing new thinking to bear, but also having a very specific application that you want to apply that new thinking to. Because, a new idea is just a new idea unless you're actually doing something with it. So for me, great innovation is applied creativity in a way that actually is taking new thinking with what we know already, bringing those two things together and getting a much better outcome from those two things. So that's really kind of how I think of innovation. It's on that curve, and it's not quite as risky as pure creative thinking is, and it's not as predictable or as sort of low risk as continuous improvement is, which often just tends to look at what we did before and tries to incrementally improve. So
I heard that spectrum in there of kind of the high risk end over to the other more just continuous improvement, but kind of a marriage or somewhere in between of some of that. Interesting. Do you consider yourself to be a disruptor?
Well, that's a big term in today's environment. I like to think that I self-disrupt on a regular basis, which allows me to think about things differently. I remember IBM as a client coming to me some years ago and saying, we just want to do things differently than the way you're doing them. And so you've got to figure out a different way because our people are moving. We've got to be able to do something that is online in a completely different format than anybody has ever conceived of before. And so, one choice might have been, well, gee, I don't know. How do we do that? And so I just took it on and I said, why don't we get together and build that together, and figure out what that looks like. And it was way ahead of its time in terms of what other people were doing. So I like to think that I've disrupted in a few different ways, but I'm hoping that the next decade ahead of me is going to give me even greater playground to do that, since I also spent a lot of my time running the company, right? And now I'm in a position where I can maybe play around with some new thinking a little bit more than I had time to before.
Yeah. Is there anything you'd want to give us a sneak preview about, or are you just going to kind of tease with your, we're doing lots of new things? I can see the excitement on your face as you talk about it.
Yes. Well, we're doing, so I mentioned earlier that we're doing some really interesting application work that makes that ability to kind of take what you know about your thinking, really plug and play, and provide people with sort of that ease of application that is so obvious, so right there. It's kind of like, and you want to take it to the next step, sort of like when you're watching Netflix, and and you shouldn't actually click to see the next part of the series, but you do anyway because you just can't wait, right? So that's kind of how we like to describe how what our learning looks like. I'm personally looking at machine learning, and have been studying the future of work, and what the workplace is going to look like in the future, and this notion of augmented work, and how we're already extending our brains. We're kind of delegating part of our brains out to systems. We don't think about it, but we've delegated a lot of our memory to Google, because we go out and we don't bother retaining things because we can just Google it. So why should we waste that precious space? So I'm working on a project right now that's really exciting, that will allow you to take all different kinds of content and be able to interpret and analyze that very quickly, and know how that relates to your thinking, and better reach other kinds of thinkers because you've been able to do that. So it's going to be a very sophisticated machine learning based platform. So working on that right now, very excited about it. I think it's going to provide kind of the new spell check of the future for people as they're doing their day-to-day jobs.
Wow.
So it's a very exciting project.
That does sound really exciting. I wanted to ask you, in terms of, you said yes to me. I'm kind of a disruptor, and how has that played out throughout your career? I'm just, kind of, for people who are listening that are, that want to be more innovative, that maybe want to appropriately disrupt. How have you seen that throughout your?
Well, I think it's really important to acknowledge that it takes guts to go against the grain. Even in today's environment, where there's almost like a sexy factor in terms of saying, I'm disrupting, I'm doing something different. So the good news is, I think the environment is much more open to people bringing different thinking to the table. But it almost always, when you are trying to make a change happen, whether it's in a personal relationship, whether it's in a team, whether it's in an organization, it requires kind of walking out into a zone that can feel quite risky, and that also requires a tolerance for ambiguity, because you don't always really know what it is that's going to happen, and you can't hold on to your initial idea of how it's going to happen, because most of the time it won't happen the way you thought it would. So my recommendation for people is to take a moment. I did a TEDx talk that talked about think like your future depends on it, because it really does. To take a moment to let themselves hear the ideas that their brain's providing them on a day-to-day basis. Most of us have those ideas. We don't pay attention to them. We sort of disregard them. We discount them. A lot of us have those ideas first thing in the morning. Maybe we have them while we're driving home or in the shower. You only have about 10 seconds of memory when you're in that brain state, and if you don't capture them, you'll lose them. So the first step is just listening to your own brain.
Right.
And then it takes that willingness to take a risk, to put yourself out there, to maybe bring up something that's going to make people uncomfortable, so that getting comfortable with your own discomfort and other people's discomfort with new thinking is something that you kind of have to practice and get build some resilience for. But it's so worth it. It's so worth it. And so often, once people get it, they'll say, God, why didn't I think of that? And if they don't, then they will the next time. right? So that notion of just kind of going for it, I think is and as early as you can, start practicing. If you're earlier in your career, sometimes you have the least amount of baggage and the most to add, the greatest amount of insight to add. So one of the things that I do every time somebody joins our company is I ask them to take a notebook and put it and keep it with them, or whatever, an Evernote file or whatever they might be using. And anything that occurs to them as they look at our organization and it makes them think like, why do they do that? Or, gee, wouldn't it be great if we did that, to capture it and to share that with their leader? Because they haven't been, I guess you could say, contaminated by our culture in terms of the way we do things at Herrmann. And it's great to see what people come up with, right? And so there's a great beauty in not knowing. And I think feeling okay about not knowing is one of the biggest barriers that people have to feeling like they can take that first step towards something that, is totally new.
You touched on it, the idea, the moment the idea comes and how there's just a brief period of time and it's usually gone. I remember reading something in some of the Herrmann International material about the time before sleeping and the time in the morning. And I don't remember exactly what you called it, but kind of what happens.
So there's a brain state shift. So actually, as we're kind of winding down and relaxing, or we're kind of on automatic. And sometimes you don't want to be on automatic because, you've got to be paying attention to something. But so this often occurs just as we're heading into sleep, where our brain state changes as we're waking in the morning. Or also kind of we're in automatic mode. For some people, they say it's like washing the dishes, mowing the lawn, taking a shower, driving, right? So it's what's important is to kind of identify that sweet spot for you. There is a brain state change, which means that actually our memory processing is changing as well. And that's why there's such a brief moment. And, I've had so many people say to me, well, God, I think I solved world peace and I can't remember what it is I came up with. I even know somebody who put a whiteboard up in his shower above the water line because that's where he did all of his best thinking. And his wife was like, what are you? And he's like, just trust me. This is important. Wasn't a good place to have his phone to record his ideas, which is normally how he did it. So, there's a change in brain state. And I think if you can kind of induce that by just taking a break during the day, going for a walk in nature, stopping and listening to music. But what's important is to pay attention. Pay attention to what's floating around in your head and capture it, even if it doesn't make sense at the moment.
So tell me, as you think about yourself as a leader and your accomplishments, what is the one thing that you really like about yourself as a leader?
Gosh, I think it's the same thing that probably drives a few other people crazy. It's my curiosity. I think that, and I actually think that curiosity is going to be one of the core competencies of the future, because you've got to be curious as a leader to really engage with people. If you're not curious about who you're leading, you just don't ask the questions that you might ask about who they are and what they care about and why they get out of bed in the morning. So I am constantly asking questions. I'm always wondering why something is designed the way it is. I think it's driven some people and my family a little crazy on occasion because they're kind of like, why do you care? So I think that curiosity is part of what allows me to stay excited and interested even when things are changing or things are difficult. Just getting curious and staying curious. So I hope that's something I never lose.
Yeah, that's a great one. It's in the viacharacter.org, the 24 character values, the curiosity pops up, in those, and those are wonderful too, but I agree with you. Curiosity is one of the best. Something that you don't like about yourself as much?
Impatience. I'm an incredibly, because I get excited about things, and this is a trait of a lot of people who are big picture thinkers like I am, is that they see something in their mind's eye and it seems so obvious to them, and they think, wow, how come other people can't see this? And there is a step between thinking about something and seeing it, and that is that you have to describe it very effectively and get people on board with it. But I think it's very easy for me to get impatient because I'm anxious to see things happen and move as quickly as they can. So I've had to mind hack my way around dealing with that impatience, because other people don't always appreciate it. They misinterpret it. They think you're, not really respecting their thinking or whatever. So I try to take notes while I'm listening to capture some of what's going on in my head, so that I'm less prone to feel like I need to share that immediately and kind of keep things moving.
Personally, what are you most proud of? Your most proud personal moment? We've talked a lot about business and career, but what is Ann Herrmann most proud of in terms of your personal life, if you don't mind me asking?
No, I would say that it's actually having been able to not only bring together the work that I care so much about, and then be in a family environment where I have family members who were excited enough to step in and play that role in the same way that I did with my father. It's being a mom to two boys who who lived with an entrepreneur who traveled a lot and wasn't always home, and was dragging them all over the planet with her, taking them to trade shows, bringing them into workshops. A husband who was supportive all along that process and often heard me telling stories about him in workshops and things like that. So I think it's that ability for me to create that family culture, as well as a company culture that really, where we weren't just talking about what we do, but we were really living it.
Sure.
And for me, the true test is in your family if you can do that, but also in the company that you're leading.
We were talking about your children. I'm curious to know about your childhood. Was there a childhood challenge that you had to overcome?
Interestingly enough, because of my curiosity and my impatience that I mentioned earlier, I was not always the easiest learner to have in the classroom. And so I was kind of always pushing the envelope, which was not helpful. A lot of teachers, didn't fully understand. I always wanted to be doing something a little bit different than everybody else. And that, as a kid, you don't fully understand why somebody doesn't get you, why you're different than everybody else. And, you're supposed to, kind of go with what the teacher says all the time. And so I think my biggest challenge, frankly, was kind of navigating the traditional world of education and finding my way through that in a way that really fit who I was. I think the good news is a lot is changing in that world, but I'm sure that there are people listening today who've experienced that same feeling, at least, if not all the time, at least with one teacher, right? And so what's great about what we teach is, okay, so think of that as a learning opportunity. Think of that as a way to stretch your thinking, to build that muscle, to see if you can embrace a different way of looking at something, and take it on as a personal challenge. And I didn't do that early in life, but I think I've learned how to do that as an adult.
So what are you curious about now?
Well, I am really curious about what is going to be happening in the very near term around how we conceptualize what we do at work. So I said I'm fascinated with this notion of the future of work and how technology and humans will come together. I think it's important for us to continue to be smarter than technology, and to be as adaptive as we can be. A lot of people are threatened and feel like technology is actually going to take away their job, or it's going to somehow get in the way of their ability to get their work done. I think with the right design in place and a better understanding of how we think, we can find ways to help people augment their thinking in ways that they never even thought was possible. So for me, that is what I'm most curious about. And how will that play out? We're a 100% remote company as an organization, a global company. That's a different model than one that you could even think of, 10, 15 years ago. It means that you think differently about how you build culture, and it allows us to attract great talent. But it also means that you have to, think about how you engage with that talent differently. So that whole notion of, how do you leverage technology in a way that allows that to happen? but how do we truly augment what it is that our brains bring to the table and feel great about that and open up even more opportunities than we've ever had before for our thinking? That's what I'm most excited about right now.
Tell me what you hope to accomplish going forward. What is it that you would like to see happen personally or professionally in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think for me, it's that ability to change the way people think about their own development. I think we all need to be lifelong learners. And so many people kind of, they get through their college days and then they go to work and they kind of think, okay, that learning, that full-time learning thing is now done. And then it becomes almost like a part-time sort of extracurricular part of our lives. So I am looking for ways that we can help individual thinkers and organizations embrace who they are as thinkers and learners and take that initiative themselves to own what it is that they need to be learning to pursue that development. And not necessarily hope that someone is going to bestow that upon them. And I'm not saying that that's true for a lot of people, but I just don't think that's going to happen in the future. I think we're going to need to own our own development. Yeah. You may be working for 20 different organizations throughout your career. You need to own what that path looks like. Take some risks and figure out how it is you can really take advantage of your own thinking and build that whole brain muscle that will allow you to really thrive in this crazy world that we live in rather than just survive and feel like it's coming at you, right? And I think it's through that owning it that's really going to make a difference.
Best advice you ever received?
It's advice that I probably would not have thought I would say is the best advice. I think in some instances, I remember I had a mentor for some years who was just great. And I called him up one day and I was so frustrated with a situation that was not going the way I wanted it to as a leader. And he said, he listened to me and then he said, "Oh gosh, Anne, I am so thrilled to see you so uncomfortable." And I said, "Gee, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. What do you mean?" And he said, "Because discomfort is a sign of learning. So every time you feel that discomfort, think of it as a learning opportunity. Reframe." And I think we're kind of trained early in life to kind of try to shy away from that discomfort. So it is definitely something you need to reframe around and kind of mind hack your way around. But it was the best advice I'd ever gotten, which is, when that moment, that tinge of discomfort shows up in your personal life, in your professional life, just take that moment and step back and say, okay, what am I intended to learn here?
Right.
And it totally changes the way you look at it.
Interesting. So, Anne, how do you want to be remembered?
I would love to be remembered as someone who brought to the world some very important, impactful, but practical and useful tools for every individual out there to get excited about the brains they bring to the table and feel like whatever that preference might be, that they can do so much with that. And for me, if I think about the millions of lives that we've impacted so far, the more of that I can do and let people feel like they owned the process rather than it coming from someone else, then I'll feel really great about what I've done.
So what questions should I have asked you but did not?
Oh, I guess probably what do I do outside of work for my own development? And I think you personally know a little bit about this. So I actually, and I had an interesting learning aha not too long ago because I was doing so much reading in the research I was doing that I felt like my visual brain was kind of in the process of shrinking, right? I'm a natural visual thinker. I use that all the time, but it just seemed like I was struggling with that. So my youngest son said to me, well, Mom, why don't you just work on it on a daily basis? I said, oh, that's an interesting idea. He says, you're always talking to people about doing development work and learning. And he said, I know you like photography. Why don't you just take 10, 20, 30 minutes a day, find something to photograph, and then really get into it, and then do something with it. Post it on Instagram, do something with it, because you're very purpose-driven. So if you don't do something with it, it's not going to work. So I've been doing that for over 2 years, and I can't tell you how much impact it's had on the way I look at the world, that visual acuity, but also that allows me to see ideas differently, see strategic landscapes differently. So sometimes it's the little things that we embrace, those little rituals, and that's part of what we're developing right now that's so exciting for me. Those daily rituals that we adopt, that, it can be as easy as practicing something that you've never done before and stepping more deeply into that and having fun with it. We have a tool called the Whole Brain Walk Around that encourages people to step into the 4 different mental modes. Be analytical. Ask yourself that real question. What is that about? Or be practical. What needs to happen here? Or, be more personal and relationship oriented. Or be experimental. And if you take every challenge you face and just step into those 4 modes, when you look at it, it doesn't take a lot of time, and it can actually change the way you think. And that's, for me, that's pretty exciting.
That's amazing. Anne, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to sit down with you and to learn more about you and your organization. And we can't wait to see what you do next. So appreciate you coming today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.